Senator Kirsten Gillibrand recently has stated that there will likely be another UAP UFO congressional hearing either this July or September. Welcome to Expanded Knowledge. Here we explore a variety of topics that are less well studied and off the beaten path, but topics that expand our understanding of the possibility of our reality, the world we live in, and what it means to be human. Now, the topic that tends to come up and be a focal point here is the UFO UAP subject because of its implications and because of how serious it is being taken right now by the United States government. The whistleblower allegations of David Grusch just about a year ago. And we're in unprecedented times. The U.S. government has stated that UAPs are real, physical objects that are unable to be identified, that are displaying flight characteristics, intelligently controlled, confirmably physical objects, able to move from sky to water, all of these things, right? Government's admitted that already. Next level has been the last year, David Grusch coming out. David Grusch, if you're not aware, if you click on this, I'm sure you probably have some awareness, but in case you don't, David Grusch testified before the United States Congress last July that during a 4-year investigation that he conducted for the UAP task force from 2019 to 2023, he discovered that there were top secret programs, and he discovered evidence and 40 witnesses who testified to the Inspector General of Intelligence that there has been decades-long UFO crash retrieval operations, reverse engineering operations, as well as a sophisticated disinformation campaign targeting the American populace, as well as retaliation and reprisals against David Grusch for coming forward with this information. We had the hearing in July 2023. Little things have happened here and there. People said this and that. Congress people talking about it, continuing to try to push for it. We've had the official office called AARO, All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Department of Defense, issue the historical report this year earlier in February or March of 2024, which basically said there's no evidence of extraterrestrials, yada, yada, yada. So the conversation now is at large is mostly, a suspicion that Arrow is trying to cover up what the truth is behind this all, or obfuscate it, or at the very least just delay and push back any kind of genuine disclosure about what the government knows about UAPs and UFOs. It should mention as well just that David Grusch also said non-human intelligence, non-human biologics were recovered. So in other words, alien bodies. So that was part of the claims that were stamped credible and urgent after a 16-month investigation into his claims by the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, Thomas Monheim. So given all that, we would think this would be a pretty huge subject, but of course it's not. And the thing is when they do have another official hearing, that will get covered by the mainstream media. So what the hearing does and what is said in it is what I think is really going to move the needle in a more significant way on a more mass media kind of general population scale. And we've been hearing rumors there's going to be another hearing. Who's going to do it, right? Is it going to be the House Oversight Committee? Are they going to get a select committee in the House to just focus on this UAP investigation? Is it going to be the Senate? For me, I've always thought it makes sense that it would be in the Senate. But in any regards, the recent news here that we're going to focus on today is Senator Gillibrand just a few days ago told Matt Laszlo, who's a reporter, has a website called Ask a Poll. We'll take a look at it, where he goes to Washington on Capitol Hill, and he just interviews politicians as they're walking around and ask them questions. And UAP subjects, one of the subjects that he prioritizes. So we get some great information that way. You would think more reporters would be doing it, but they're not. And instead, we're getting other news. Actually, I saved a couple of these on my phone the other day. And, this is the kind of headlines that we get, right? 6-year-old killed in freak accident with badminton racket, right? U.S. teen falls over 300 feet to her death while sightseeing. This is the kind of stuff that's the priorities for news companies to cover, but not the fact that, there's an active investigation into the existence of aliens and recovered spacecrafts and a 80-year disinformation campaign and et cetera. Yeah, that's not important or interesting. Anyway, let's get into it here. Let's start with who is Kirsten Gillibrand. And I'm sorry, it's Kirsten Gillibrand. Actually, I've been saying Kristen. I thought it was Kirsten, but I was looking at the Twitter posts that broke some of this information, and I think they spelled it Kristen. So then I was saying, oh, well, I guess that I was wrong. Anyway, so this is Kirsten Gillibrand. She's one of the 2 New York senators. Of course, the other New York senator is Chuck Schumer. And it's kind of funny. I live in New York, so these 2, Gillibrand and Schumer, are my 2 representatives, and they are at the top of the UFO UAP investigation, especially Chuck Schumer, right, with the Schumer UAP Disclosure Act, which we'll also take another look at today. So, why is Gillibrand significant? Well, because she's on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. She's also on the Armed Services Committee. So these are the 2 most relevant groups in the Congress to be dealing with the UAP UFO issue. The other one is being the House Oversight Committee, obviously, because it's their job to oversee what's happening in the rest of the government. And if there's a secret UFO crash retrievals and so forth going on, that falls under the importance of the House Oversight Committee. But the Intelligence Committee, right, is of course vital, because that is where all the classified information lives. That's where, top secret information for national security is handled and carried out. That's intelligence, right? And then armed services obviously is also relevant, because we're talking about technology or threats to national security involving technology with the potential to be, used as weapons and so forth. So she's very relevant in that sense. And again, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, right? Here's the chair. The chair people are Mark Warner and Marco Rubio. Both of these guys have made overt statements about the reality of the UAP UFO sightings, about what they've been told. Warner has some quotes. I've got them put into a book I'm working on. He said some pretty interesting things. He's kind of under the radar. It's kind of interesting, Warner. He's the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he's been pretty quiet. But to me, that's probably like a smart thing. I think that he probably knows there's something very real going on here, and it's probably smarter to kind of stay quiet. And I think Rubio is probably doing the same thing. If it's not from their own decision, it's probably someone advising them, stay quiet. Just keep moving on this behind the scenes. That's the way to do this. It's a chess game, right? Rubio you can go watch him and what he said, especially last year around the time of Grusch's story breaking and everything. Rubio said he's had a number of people come and tell him things that are just shocking. And these people are currently working at very high positions in the government. So, and again, the Senate Intelligence Committee, those are the only people essentially that have a special security clearance in the United States Congress. Remember, there's 535 members, elected members of the United States Congress. Of those 535, you're looking at the list here of who gets briefed on the most sensitive, classified, top secret information, right? And remember, the whole allegation here from David Grusch in this whole thing is that Congress is not being briefed on even more secret information that's being withheld in private pseudo-government entities and illegally being not overseen by the government. And this is the committee that would be the primary committee handling that. And there is Gillibrand. She's on the committee. Also of note for Gillibrand, right? And we'll get into her comments now, but this is important. Here's Carl Nell's presentation at the Soul Foundation conference going over the UAP Disclosure Act. And who signed the UAP Disclosure Act? Again, there we see it, right? Gillibrand, right? And there's Rubio and the other people from the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I've covered the UAP Disclosure Act. I have a whole other video on my channel, if you can find it there. And you could find the details of it in other places. But yeah, I mean, the UAP Disclosure Act had the word non-human intelligence over 20 times written in it. It said that all government agencies and associated contractors must hand over all evidence of UAP, including technology derived from non-human intelligence, biologics, and this whole bill unanimously passed in the Senate. And Gillibrand signed on to that. So keep that in mind, right? When we look at what Gillibrand is seeming to kind of be saying here, that she signed that bill that basically said and put into serious legislation in an election year. She's a Democrat in an election year with Biden coming up. If the Republicans ever wanted to just, discredit the Democrats and trash their campaign, they could just use this, right? If there was nothing to it, they could just say, can you believe the Democrats? Can you believe Chuck Schumer and Senator Gillibrand that they're saying that aliens exist and that the government has secret crash retrieval and they want to pass a bill to make it have to be turned over to the U.S. government? So obviously the writing's on the wall. There's something here. Not to mention this. Look at how balanced it is. You see, this is a bipartisan bill, right? Recently, now I like Tim Burchett. I'm a little bit hesitant to really. I think he's a little bit cynical about the whole thing, but I understand it. Tim Burchett, of course, he's a Republican in the House of Representatives who's been very outspoken. He's the co-leader of the UAP caucus with another representative, Anna Paulina Luna, in the House. But recently he was interviewed because the UAP Disclosure Act, right? Representative Robert Garcia, who my last video was on, recently tried to pass the stipulations, again, the more specific stipulations of having a review board to have to disclose information and to have to go through a rigorous process of giving reasons why they can't disclose certain information and having a planned schedule of when they will, how long it will be postponed for and when they'll revisit it for disclosure, as well as eminent domain, meaning, okay, if government contractors that are private entities, if they illegally used funds to retrieve UFOs and reverse engineer and make technology and so forth, whatever else turns out to be the truth of this whole thing, whatever was done illegally will be confiscated, become property of the U.S. government. And the wording that's important here, because people say, oh, they can't trust it. What's the government going to do with it? Then they're going to control it. The wording says, for the benefit of the public good. Now, I know government has a lot of corruption. I get it. But look, we're trying to we're trying to root out some of the deep, potentially the deepest and most shocking corruption in human history here. So I try to be optimistic. I'm always a bit of an idealist, but I like to think that there's a chance that the government could, take this technology in eminent domain. Let's say it's free energy, whatever it is, and say, okay, well, now we're going to give this to a private industry, and we're going to reshape our world. you know, but the point here is that let me just pull back up my screen here. The point here is that, and going back to Tim Burchett real quick, all right, not to get sidetracked too much. Robert Garcia wanted to pass this, just did this recently, a week ago. And Burchett was interviewed, and Burchett said, he said, I don't think it's gonna really do anything. And the interviewer said, why? And Burchett said, well, because he's a Democrat. And I thought that was a really not a good look by Tim Burchett, because, hey man, first of all, you're the leading person in the House addressing this issue, and apparently you don't even know that Senator Schumer co-sponsored the bill with Republican Mike Rounds, and they gave a whole speech on the Senate floor, where they were saying how great it is to be working together and for it to be bipartisan. And Marco Rubio and Todd Young, right? So I thought it was pretty lame that Burchett said, I don't think the UAP Disclosure Act will work because he's a Democrat. Like, dude, it's a bipartisan bill, literally. So anyway, moving on from that. Okay. Let's check our time here. All right. 16 minutes. Keep this thing to 25-30. But all this context is so relevant in analyzing this, so it's hard to fit it all in. All right, Gillibrand's statements and then Grusch's statements. This is all happening in the last few days here. So Matt Laszlo, I thought we could do this just for more context. Okay, this is not the one from a couple days ago. This is actually a year ago. All right, where Matt Laszlo on Ask a Poll, the guy who interviews senators and Congress people as they walk around at the Capitol Hill about the UAP issue, Gillibrand was involved very directly in scheduling that first hearing last year in July. Funny thing is, though, she wasn't at the hearing, which is interesting. Okay. So, but she was directly involved in setting up that hearing. And from the language here in the interview, she was working with David Grusch to set that up. Laszlo says, any update on the UAP stuff? She says, we're trying to schedule a meeting with the whistleblower, that's Grusch, so we can ask him questions directly. We're going to schedule meetings with the people he mentions in his whistleblowing complaint. Okay, so initially she said, we are going to try to schedule meetings with the people he mentions in his whistleblowing complaint. Apparently that never happened. And that's what Grusch's statement a few days ago was that Gillibrand does not have access to his witness list. So I guess she never got that. And then Matt Laszlo basically says, will it be classified or private? She says, whatever the whistleblower wants. And we'll have to assess if there's classified information and so forth. We'll create the right settings. Hopefully he'll come in. And Laszlo says, is this really layered, trying to get to the bottom of it? And Gillibrand says, yes, it's extremely layered because the allegations are very serious. All right. So a year ago, before the first historic monumental hearing in July, it was Gillibrand that was working to get this all set up and apparently was working with Grusch. So it's interesting. Now we fast forward to almost a year later, just about a year later, and about 5 days ago, right? This was from June 5th, and where Gillibrand says probably July for a public UAP hearing in the U.S. Senate. Okay, cool. That's good. All right. The reason I'm partial to the Senate investigations is I look at the history in the 70s, the mid 1970s, we had a very interesting period. And actually, as just a quick sidetrack, if you want to learn about this, where I really learned a lot more, check out this book. It's called State of Silence, The Espionage Act and the Rise of American Secrecy Regime. Really good book. Everything is cited. It's all evidence, facts based, and it basically shows you how what he calls it, a secrecy regime, was created in America and was maintained. Now, they had this one period that you read about in the book in the mid 70s, early to mid 70s. By late 70s, it kind of faded back into the secrecy regime controlling things. But we had, for example, the Watergate scandal that you've heard of, the Pentagon Papers that you've probably heard of. But there's something else that I think is probably the most significant event in government transparency and sort of the possibility of what the government could be hiding from the American people, and that is the Church Committee hearings. All right, and I'm sorry for us to get sidetracked here. But this is actually kind of relevant. And basically, there were all these scandals and all these allegations coming out in the intelligence community. Remember, that's the 17, 18 organizations that work in the executive branch of the government: CIA, FBI, NSA, NRO, all of them. There was all of these scandals and illegal activities going on. And that had been happening from in the 50s, the 60s, into the 70s. So it finally came out, and there was 3 separate investigations in the government. There was a executive branch presidential investigation into the intelligence community. That was called the Rockefeller Investigation Committee. There was one in the House called the Pike Committee. And there was one in the Senate called the Church Committee. Now, when you look back at that history of those 3, right, and this was to see, hey, what crazy, illegal, unethical, immoral, scandalous stuff has the CIA and others been doing? Of the 3 of those, the most consequential by far was the Church Committee hearing in the Senate. The Pike Committee was important, but it just didn't have the same effect for whatever reason. And someone who's more deeper into political science, you probably explain that a little better. But the fact is, the Pike Committee in the House was had less of a punch. The Rockefeller executive branch investigation. Now, remember, the CIA is part of the executive branch. All of this intelligence community is part of the executive branch, so we can expect that would be the lightest one, which it was. Yes, it did uncover things, but it was the most forgiving, and some believe it was an effort to basically kind of do damage control. But it was the Church Committee in the Senate that had a bunch of hearings. It went for, I believe, a better part of a year, something like 80 hearings. And I think I'm low shooting that. It might have actually been hundreds of hearings investigating, and that was their sole job, and they uncovered all this stuff. Okay, this is where the public learned about MK Ultra, was through this in 75, that the CIA had a top secret mind control program where they were basically experimenting with drugs and other mind control techniques on unwitting citizens. Thousands of them is what has been reported, although at the time of some of these hearings, it was a much lower number, but it has since been found or purported through different sources. And actually, I'll give you another source for that really quickly. I'm not going to be able to pull it up real quick. It's on my whatever. Controlling the Human Mind. Controlling the Human Mind. Okay, yeah. Sorry. This book right here. which I'm currently reading, and I highly recommend it. Again, this is one of those books where this author meticulously sourced every single piece of information that he writes about in the book, and it's all government documentation, U.S. patents, official papers of U.S. government organizations. And in there, he states that it was thousands of people that were mind control experimented on unwittingly. And there were other allegations, but my point just being, all right, to get us back on track here, my point being, when I hear that Gillibrand wants a UAP hearing in the Senate, to me, that is a really good sign. Because in the Senate, we have Chuck Schumer. We have the people who made the UAP Disclosure Act. We have Marco Rubio, who have made very clear indications that they're willing to get to the bottom of this in an objective way. And by all accounts, it seems like they're really not trying to cover up anything. Whereas in the House, you already had the UAP Disclosure Act that was unanimously passed in the Senate. You already had it gutted and rejected in the House. So for whatever reason, it seems like the House, whoever's trying to keep the lid on this secret, the House is more compromised, it seems like. The question here now is Gillibrand compromised by the secrecy group, whatever we want to call it? I don't know. But a hearing in the Senate to me would mean, oh boy, I would love to see a hearing in the Senate and to see Mark Warner and Marco Rubio and Chuck Schumer questioning witnesses. I think that's where we got to go. I think the best way to begin disclosure, in my own personal opinion, is probably through a Senate hearing like the Church Committee that investigates this, subpoenas witnesses, people come in, David Grusch's 40 whistleblowers come in, and we just get the ball rolling, right? Then that will create more weight for the legislation to get passed, and we can just move forward, and that will help the information come out. So, what did Gillibrand say recently? Well, she was interviewed, and she said that she's hoping they're going to get a hearing in July. Or if not July, then September. Here's what she said to Laszlo, quote, "I said I wanted to do it this summer, and he said he'd love to do it." I don't know who he is, because I don't know what the question is. Who is he? Well, if you know, then maybe put it in the comments. But I don't know who he'd love to do it is. Huh. Maybe someone has clarified that on somewhere else, Twitter or YouTube or something. But here's the other quote Laszlo got. And I told him I wanted him to do video of the things that he's figured out. Okay. So she's probably referring to Aro and the current director of AARO. That's the other thing about Gillibrand. She's been very supportive of Aro, which for some in the UFO field have seen that as a red flag, that she's so supportive and speaks so highly of Aro as she has in public statements multiple times. That means she may be part of the cover up, but it's also fair to just not jump to conclusions and just say, well, she's just trying to be optimistic about Aro and support them and get them to be able to do what they need to do. So, and she says, because like they figured out a bunch of things that looked really weird, and now I want to know what they are because it gives the community something to fully understand, to see how strong the science is. And you can listen to that clip somewhere in here, but here's why I don't like this. And there's a longer clip, actually. You can, if you check out this channel over here, Down to Earth with Christian Harloff, and this video here about David Grusch, you can check that out. And in there is the full interview audio with Gillibrand. I'm sure it's here on Askapol, but I'm not seeing it easily, and I don't want to play it here. I want to kind of keep getting through this. But in that interview, even though it's not quote here, she says that they figured out 3 of these unexplainable UAP videos. out of like 7 or something, whatever this group is of 7. And she says that that's what she wants the focus of the hearing to be, for Arrow to show how they were able to explain away the videos, and as she says, so that the community has something to fully understand and to see how strong the science is. Now, that's all good if we were where we were like 2 years ago, right? In the May 2022 hearings, the first UAP, UFO hearings in 50 years that were in the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, I believe. It was under that committee in the House. And that's what they did there. I mean, and people kind of just laughed at it. That was the hearing in 2022 where that's what they did. They showed a couple videos. It was comical, the videos that they showed, and tried to explain away. And you even had the people, Jay Stratton and Travis Taylor, who were on the UAP task force, who was the precursor to ARO. You even had the scientists who analyzed the video, this green one, that they tried to explain as being due to night vision goggles and how they interpret the data. And the chief scientist who analyzed this video, who is a PhD in optical physics, or something very close to having to do with optical physics, said 100% we had deemed that this was truly anomalous and that those were legitimate flying objects shaped like that and so forth. And they were furious that the deputy director of intelligence of the Navy, who was the current whoever he was representing the UAP task force at that time. I don't know what his position was. I don't know why. I mean, Jay Stratton was the one directing the UAP task force. If you can correct me on that, but I'm sure that's pretty true. He wasn't even in this hearing, and I'm not sure. Maybe he took over at that point. But the point being, all right, not to sidetrack us here, is that they did this in 2022, and they were grilled by Congress people that asked questions, and they stood there and said, yeah, we can explain these, we can't explain these, and it is what it is, right? It sounds like Gillibrand wants to do the same thing. And this is not a logical way to follow up from the July 2023 hearing, right? We are beyond looking at videos and saying, is it anomalous? Can it be explained? Okay, that's one aspect of this. But we have David Grusch's whistleblower claims being the focal point, saying that we're way past that. There's UFOs flying, and it's known by people in the government and private industry affiliated with government contractors. There's been crash retrievals and reverse engineering in bodies, and it's being kept secret illegally from the United States Congress. And I submitted 4 years of evidence and 40 whistleblower witnesses to the Inspector General, the intelligence community, and this is the focus. So it should be very simple. Start bringing in David Grusch's witnesses and start asking them questions under oath, and carry out a real investigation, not look at videos and show the community how we can explain them. Not to mention, we know from statements like Lou Elizondo and Tim Burchett that they are sitting on videos that are not cleared to be released to the public yet, if they ever will be. They're sitting on videos that are, as Burchett said, and as Elizondo said, they would blow the, we've seen the gimbal video, the go fast video, right, which are pretty interesting and compelling in themselves. But apparently this other video, specifically this 23-minute video that they mentioned, is like next level. So why would you have a hearing after a year? Finally, we get another hearing a year later, and that's what you would focus on? No. So to me, that's a red flag. That is a red flag, because I don't know. Is Gillibrand really going to investigate this thing, honestly. Is she really going to push, or has she been compromised by people in the national security state who are saying, hey, we got to pump the brakes on this. We got to pump the brakes on this because it's dangerous if we let this information out. Who knows? All right. But clearly, I think that Gillibrand is not, say, on the same page as like Chuck Schumer, Marco Rubio, or members of the so-called UAP caucus in the House of Representatives. And at worst, we could say that she is actively working for the control secrecy group. All right. So let's end on what David Grusch said. Now, here's what's interesting, right, is that Gillibrand, this was reported by Matt Laszlo on June 5th, and then Grusch came out on June 8th, 3 days later, with a statement specifically referring to Senator Gillibrand. Now, before we get into that really quickly, just wanted to show you how hard it is. I was just trying to find Grusch's statement, right? This just happened a few days ago. You would think it would be huge, like pop up right there. It's nowhere on the first page on Google. And what's first on Google? This Joe Rogan podcast with David Grusch is mental, Right. That's the first top hit on Google, is that David Grusch is a psycho. And then even when I get a little more specific in my Google search, David Grusch statement about Gillibrand, it's just like all outdated, has nothing to do with it. So anyway, I was able to track it down. And so here's what Grusch said 3 days after Gillibrand said they would have hearings in July or September. And Grusch says, I am not aware of any of the 40 primary interview subjects that form the basis of my ICIG whistleblower complaint having gone to Arrow to be interviewed. The witnesses conveyed to me a lack of trust in Arrow and the command climate. So none of his witnesses went to Arrow, who Gillibrand's trying to do this all through and stick strictly to Arrow, and they don't trust them. I am only aware of 3 individuals with mostly secondhand knowledge that were interviewed by Arrow that I also spoke with some years back during my research process. Those individuals did produce some interesting leads I followed, but it appears that Arrow did not have the expertise to distill the information they were given, as it should have provided them access to a large body of foreign intelligence and other U.S. program information I had access to that is not reflected in the Arrow Historical Report, Volume 1. That part's pretty interesting because foreign intelligence, he leads with that. What was it about foreign intelligence that uncovered the covert U.S. crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs? Interesting. And it's not reflected in Arrow's report. So yeah, basically clearly saying there that, I saw legitimate documentation that convinced me to do this and stick my neck out here. And if Arrow had that, their report wouldn't have been what it was, which but denied that there's nothing to see here, And lastly, he says, Senator Gillibrand does not have access to my witness list. So I am unaware of how the senator allegedly has made any assessment in that regard. Okay. Plainly stating it there, right? Senator Gillibrand hasn't seen his witnesses, hasn't spoken to them. So what is this hearing going to be about? And I personally think this is Grusch's way of making a public statement as they're starting to apparently plan for this next hearing and saying, hey, look, put Gillibrand on the spot publicly. You didn't even looked at my witness list, and you're going to have another hearing that's supposed to be trying to get to the bottom of this, right? So we'll see what happens. What will this hearing be like? People have spoke about, like Anna Paulina Luna has spoke about trying to get a hearing where they're going to focus on USOs. Timothy Gallaudet has the Navy retired Rear Admiral, who's been outspoken about this and says that he knows people that worked within the crash retrieval operations. He says non-human intelligence exists. He's gone out and said that. Will there's been rumor that he might be testifying. Carl Nell, perhaps, if Carl Nell has any further firsthand information, which some have speculated he does. He hasn't said that he has any firsthand information. He hasn't said that publicly. He did vouch for David Grusch, has publicly vouched for David Grusch. And of course, that's 2 videos ago for me. We do a little deep dive into Carl Nell's recent statements. Will he be interviewed? But again, people have said this, and I'll echo it. That's not really going to move the needle. The only thing that's going to significantly move the needle is firsthand, as David Grusch said in the 2023 July hearing. He said under oath, there are people, witnesses willing to cooperate who are currently working in the programs with non-human biologics that would be willing to testify. So it's very simple. But by all accounts of the Congress people who have spoken to the media and investigative reporters, they have been blocked every step of the way. That's the one thing that almost all of them have said. For example, Moskowitz, who's kind of a part of this UAP caucus in the House, Moskowitz has said what interested him, and Burleson as well, who's very skeptical about the UFO issue, what they've both said is the thing that intrigues them and keeps them going is how they're stonewalled every time they try to follow a lead or get some more information to confirm or deny these allegations. So I think, and to close it out here, I think, we're going to get this hearing, and it could go one of 2 ways. It could go like almost a repeat of the 2022 hearing or even like the last year's IRO hearing where Kirkpatrick just got up there and said, nothing to see here. And it was just like a nothing burger, as they call it, or, you're just yawning the whole time, nothing. They could easily pull that off and just cover their bases like, hey, we did another hearing. We're continuing to move this. And as part of a deeper strategy, which is a political strategy within the government, is just postponing and delaying an issue long enough so that people lose interest and it kind of dies out. And that's a strategy that has worked in politics. So it could be something like that. Or it could go the other way, where all we need is one witness who's at the same level as David Grusch, so that we just at least start getting more people officially, through official channels, legitimately making these claims under oath. But better than that, obviously, would be a step further than Grusch, a primary firsthand witness. And that is what would really start to pry this thing open. And I think it could go either way. Honestly, who knows what's happening behind the scenes in Washington right now or where else. And who knows who's winning the kind of battles behind the scenes for disclosure. We do have the election coming up. September would be very interesting. Even July would, but September would be even more interesting as it's very close to the election. And it could go either way. It could either be, hey, we don't want anything crazy because it's going to disturb the election. We don't have time to focus on this because we have the election. Or what sometimes happens at the end of a 4-year presidential term is a massive big issue like this will actually be put off to the very end of the term for strategic reasons. And maybe this partially will be utilized in that kind of a way. But I don't know. Let me know what you think. All right, we went a little long here, but there's a lot to analyze here. I think this is like a weightier subject here. We can speculate and talk all day about what's going to happen, this and that, will there be disclosure? But when we get firm statements from people who are literally the ones planning these hearings, I think it's worth diving in. And then when we finally get David Grusch to say something for the first time in a long time, and he's been quiet too, which is probably smart, probably strategic on his part. I think in the long term, we're going to get the truth slowly rolled out. But this is critical here because it's still fresh. It still has a high interest level. It's still being investigated currently. And we have the potential for this hearing next month or in September. And man, wouldn't it be great if we get a firsthand witness to testify under oath? But we'll see what happens. So thank you for watching. If you found the video informative, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. And thank you. I will see you in the next one.